Hello and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast. Welcome back to part 2 of us talking to the amazing Mark Wells, Head of Strategy and Design at Royal Enfield Motorcycles. We're going to jump straight into it. We've got some great questions from a mutual friend who is a very well-known car designer. Right, enough of me wittering. Let's get on with it. I've got some really good, intelligent questions now from our mutual friend, or I should say acquaintance, because I've not actually met him yet. He's married to a friend of mine. So this is Julian Thompson, who's the designer of the Lotus Elise, among many other cars, and was at Jaguar for a very long time. So he asks the question, Royal Enfield plays on its history and legacy in its design. Will that always be the case? In reference to the electric bike, obviously, that is also going to change the character of the bikes you produce.
Yep.
But you've already done it with the new Himalayan.
So we've been on that kind of progressive journey for a little while now, in that you think we started with air-cooled singles, 2014, 15, we were air-cooled singles. At that point, we were 350s. We then did the GT 535, and that kind of still very much playing on our heritage, but moved us into doing something slightly different. We then did the parallel twin. That we were no longer about air-cooled singles. We were then still very much heritage. The parallel twin, we've then done the 450 water-cooled. That's another step in that direction. I don't think there is anything the brand can't do as long as we stick to those previous 3 principles. So what we shouldn't do is just do a thing because we can. There should be a reason for it. So that's exactly why we looked at an electric Himalayan, is because there is a story there. There's a reason. There's a purpose. It exists for Royal Enfield, and it still has to be accessible, and it still has to be desirable, and it still has to have that story. So it's definitely a challenge, and there are lots of, we're not the only ones. I think, Motor Guzzi, Harley, they all have that connection to an engine, and we've all got that problem. But it's a good problem, I think. I also think there's an opportunity there to look at other areas of our heritage. Heritage isn't just about the engine. There's all sorts of other bits of it that we can play on and we can amplify and use. And so, again, that doesn't faze me. It doesn't worry me. But it is a challenge, no question. It will change. And we're an evolving company all the time anyway. So, as you say, I think we've already made big steps in that direction. When we were at uni, we were told a thing about if you put a frog in a pan of water and then heat it up, the frog doesn't know, but if you drop it in the pan of water, it'll jump out. I've never done it. I don't know that you should go around heating frogs up in pans of water, kids. Anyway, but yeah, I think, it's incremental. If we make those changes in the right manner, then I think the brand can go anywhere and do anything, as long as it stays true to those kind of pillars that I talked about before.
Quite often on bike trips, we get to the top of a really high pass and I can see that we've got masses of descent. I've done this a few times. I'll often encourage the people I'm riding with to turn the engines off, and we almost have a coasting race.
I always win because I'm the fattest.
Yeah, but quite often when I'm doing that, I'm thinking, do you know what? This will be like riding an electric bike, and this is actually really great. Sort of talking to each other, still getting bits of acceleration if it's a really massive downhill, but it just gives you a little taste of what it's like to discard the internal combustion engine for a while. And it's not that bad. In fact, it's actually quite nice. It just reminded me of that when you talked about, in Bali, going up to the volcano and suddenly realising, well, no, it's about
the
bike and who you're with, really, yeah.
It's all about being on 2 wheels, and it doesn't really matter. Again, I guess it goes back to that whole trans moto, the pan moto thing. The minute you sort of say, well, I don't really care about the genre, what matters is meeting people and the conversations about how you've modified it and how you've changed it, and that'll all come. That'll all be, there'll be people finding online, they'll be downloading from some dodgy website somewhere a new map for their bike in somewhere. It won't be a map, I don't know what it'll be called, but all of that will be there, and there'll be, overclocking, like you get with computers where people overclock computers. We've been doing that. We've been playing with stuff and seeing how far you can push a motor and before it starts falling apart and delaminating. All of that stuff will still exist. I genuinely don't think the changing technology changes in the same way that, going from a 2-stroke to a 4-stroke, or going from ride-by-wire to carburetors, and you'll get people that will wax lyrical about our carburetors are better, and yeah, they are better at certain specific instances, but EFI is definitely better in many others, and it's a bit like that. I think it's just a new challenge.
Another one from Julian. A lot of motorbikes are actually designed in the UK, but nobody knows about it.
There's bikes designed in the UK and bikes designed by bike designers. I've always thought the whole national identity is a bit of a myth. For years, Ducati's lead designer was a South African. The MV was designed by Adrian Morton, who's an Englishman. Benelli, sorry, and MV. Not Ian Callum, come back to me in a minute, designed the Aprilia RSV and the V4 and the V2 the Mille. Absolutely, there are. And I think that's because there's quite a strong automotive design background, clearly through Coventry, the RCA, Northumbria. There's been quite a few people gone through that sort of design background, and so there's been quite a few bikes that design here. There's obviously also that legacy still exists of automotive engineering background that exists in the Midlands. And so you've got the likes of Triumph and Norton and some sort of small engineering businesses, and there is quite a lot of design expertise in the UK, and it's a chunk of the reason Royal Enfield set up our tech centre here, partly because of the legacy, because of the brand connection. Started in the UK, went to India, and now have a development centre, and now offshoring to the UK in a sort of a roundabout manner.
2 years ago, you said in a fantastic podcast, which I watched over the last couple of days, a podcast by Crown Unfiltered. It's number 69, a podcast on YouTube. It's like the car design podcast, but obviously you're on it talking about motorbikes. And 2 years ago, you said you've got 3 new engines being designed and 15 new bikes. So I've counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 new bikes that we've seen in the last couple of years. So that would imply there's 7 or 8 new bikes still to come. So the ones we've got the Hemi, the Bullet 350, the Super Meteor, the Hunter, Scram, the Classic 350, the Meteor 350, and I think the Interceptor and the Continental GT were already there. So potentially you've got another 8 bikes.
Can I add a 9th? And I've just looked it up on the internet just now, because I saw a few years ago, it seems like a few years ago, somebody, I thought it was you that made it, but it turns out it might have been somebody else, have made a sort of a Dakar-inspired bike. Was it Fuel?
Yeah, so
Can you make that, please?
Maybe. The motorsport with Royal Enfield sits actually within my team at the moment. So we have a custom program, and the custom program started because there were a few guys in the office that wanted to build some custom bikes, and we said, yeah, let's do that. And it's grown and snowballed, and it's now a huge part of what we do. And that's evolved. So we started building bikes that were kind of this, we have this build, train, race ethos. So our approach to motorsport is not, we're never going to go and enter, I say never say never, but going in and entering MotoGP is not what Royal Enfield's about.
Scratch that question off the list.
The motorsports program is kind of a grassroots approach. So again, about accessibility, about being able to do it. So in the States, for example, we do a program where we have a series of 20 women who have never raced before, and they build either a GT into a track bike or an Interceptor into a flat track bike. We do a boot camp where they come along, they build the bikes, so they get loads of help building the bikes, they build the bikes, and then they do a bunch of training, so they'll ride with some pros, and that will give them some, and then they do a 2 seasons of racing, and then at the end of that they graduate, and hopefully they go on and continue racing in other series and categories, and we do the whole thing again. So we also have, working with Harris Performance, so Royal Enfield bought Harris a few years ago. They are an amazing chassis and frame fabricator. So their fabrication skills are incredible. Working with them, we've built a number of flat track race bikes, which again started as something kind of local and not too big, and has got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we now race in the AFT, in the American Flat Track Series, and then also the DTRA in the UK. So we won the DTRA series last year in our class. So the Fuel bike was part of that. That was part of our custom program. It was built as a custom bike. If we ever did anything in any, in the Dakar or anything like that, our approach is never to we're never going to go and throw millions of pounds at a full-on racing outfit, because that's not who we are. That's not what our brand is about.
Yeah. I don't want you to make a Dakar bike that is competitive now. I want you to make a Dakar bike that looks like it's from 1986.
There's definitely room for something like that. I agree. And there's some good stuff that's coming out now as well. You do see other bits and bobs coming out. There was the 450 from China that's come out recently. It was quite interesting. And the Fantic, the Cove, and there's definitely some stuff there that is interesting. Our approach to anything that we do in that space would be one where it would be about people being able to get on and do it themselves and build it themselves. And so absolutely there is opportunities in that space. And going back to the question about how many more bikes we've got to come, again, I can't say what we're doing, but yeah, we've definitely got a lot more in the pipeline. There's a lot coming. The next year is going to be really busy with stuff.
Can we still have that 130 kilogram Trail bike, please, just for the UK market. Please. There's literally several people screaming at their laptops now, asking for it.
I would love 130. I'm with you 100% on that.
Sadly, listeners, the actual line cut out here, so we're never going to find out what you actually said. What's that, Noel?
I didn't know anything about this flat track thing. I mean, that doesn't get used much in your marketing, does it?
Maybe not enough. I don't know. But yes, we've got our rider over in the US is a guy called Johnny Lewis. In the US, he's relatively competitive to a point where he's winning rounds, not winning championships, but winning rounds. In the UK, Gary Nixon's our rider here, and he has wiped the floor with everything. Him and Paul Young. Paul Young's he's our chief development rider and has done less this year than he did last year because he's been over in Spain. But I mean, Youngie's an ex-GP racer, so he's super fast. I mean, that's one of the things of working at Royal Enfield. You think you're quick, and then you go and do a work event, and everybody in the world's faster than you. You know, like you go and do go-karting with your mates on a stag do, and you're like top 3 or something. You go with Royal Enfield, and you're lucky if you're top 30. Yeah, literally everybody is faster than you are.
I can't believe that. I always win. Because I did 4 years in the British Pro Kart Endurance Championship.
Did you? We've got one guy who's he left recently, but he won the Barbados Rally Championship.
Yeah, he'd probably beat me, to be fair.
He's properly quick.
Both my kids beat me now, and I used to be able to complain about because I'm heavier and bigger than you, but my oldest son is fucking massive. He's a former rugby player, so he's bloody huge, and even he beats me now.
And it's not just we've got development side, so test riders that are quick. Clearly, we've got a few BSB riders. Youngie, as I say, is ex-GP. Got a couple of Manx TT riders. They're on the test riding side. But then, for example, in my concept engineering team, I've got a guy called Sean Anderson that works for me, who's got 130 mile an hour lap at a TT. There's a couple of guys that design accessories in our genuine accessories team, design engineers. There's a guy called Curtis who has tested at Cartagena and was running at the same speed as the British Superbike guys. There are so many people in the office that are just quick anyway. A guy called Kev Kennedy who's kind of UK pro level motocross rider, and it's one of the great things about working at Royal Enfield is that honestly 70-80% of the people that work there are bike nuts.
Sounds brilliant. And listening to that podcast I've just mentioned, that the passion is just 2 hours of I know I shouldn't recommend other podcasts on my podcast, but you should listen to this other one as well, because it's really good, and you go into a little bit more detail because you're talking about design really. So the other guys are grown up, not like me and Noel, so you get some better questions as well, really. Have you got a dream bike that you would love to be able to develop but probably won't be able to?
I mean, I've got a passion for, old 500 two-strokes. I love 500 two-strokes. And when I was a kid growing up, do you remember the Bimota V-Due?
Don't remember that one.
So the V-Due was it was the bike that killed Bimota. They did a 500 V-twin that had a direct injection oil system that on paper was going to transform and revolutionise the motorcycle industry. In reality, it never worked. It would come in and you'd have the power band coming in all over the place, and direct injection fuel system, electronic direct injection fuel system. And in the end, they recalled them all and then went bust. And there were a few that were bought and then reworked with carbs. And even then, they're supposed to be a bit random. But the idea of that, I always loved, because they were, and my NSR is 130 kilos and 60 brake horse, and that's awesome. And obviously that era is long gone. The two strokes are from an emissions point of view long gone. There's lots of bikes I'd love to own, but in terms of designing a bike, I think the challenges that come up through design are equally exciting, whether you're designing like a really small scooter or a superbike. From a design point of view and a design challenges point of view, it can be just as difficult to do. I've met a few Formula One people in my career, and there's always been a level of because you can build a Formula One car, you think you can do everything, but actually it's totally different if you're doing a production vehicle. What you can do and can't do. It's not to say that they're not brilliant, they are, and lots of them are very brilliant. It's a different set of criteria. And for me, the design problem is the thing that's interesting. And actually, as I was saying before, I love all sorts of motorcycles, and whether they're big sports bikes, I quite enjoy riding big adventure bikes. I quite enjoy riding little adventure bikes. The challenge is trying to do that and do it in a way that works for our brand and at our price point and so actually it's not about going what's the biggest bestest thing you could ever make. As I say, there's loads of, I mean, I would love to own a Manx Norton. I'd love to own a Yamaha R7. I think they're beautiful bikes. A 916 for me, obviously, an old Kajiva Elephant, sort of like a Guzzi V8 RC166, bikes like that are mechanically interesting and different. I would love to own those, but I don't know they would do something like that would be any more of a challenge. I mean, we did do, I don't know whether you saw a few years ago, Royal Enfield did a concept V-twin model, EICMA 2017, I think it was. We did a KX, put it the KX concept, and it was a V-twin, and it was really looking at, kind of almost addressing, going back to Julian's question about what could Royal Enfield be. And we did that to try and start warming the market up to the idea that we could be more than just a single. And that was quite an interesting thing to do. It had a girder front end, but like a very modern take on a girder front end and a different rear suspension and just different layout, and was quite an interesting thing. And it would be quite interesting to see that come out onto the market. And I suspect, again, never say never, but I suspect that's probably, with the way that the EV is coming on, that's probably unlikely in the future now.
God, it's a beautiful looking thing, though. Just looking at pictures on the internet now.
It was a really nice collaborative project. We had a really young designer working with an older designer together, and they have long been obsessed with kind of pre-war things like Norton Internationals and that kind of board tracker style where they had the big wheels. So this was on 19-inch rims. I think rim sizes are really important to the propulsion of a bike, and that was an exercise in that sort of propulsion and stance, and it is a beautiful looking thing.
Years ago, when I bought my Honda NC 700.
Oh, Jesus, let it go. Let it go.
I'll get around to it. Listen, I'll get around to it.
Come on. We're talking to one of the world's leading bike designers, and you're talking about your fucking Honda NC. For fuck's sake.
But it was an amazing bike in terms of design, as I'm sure Mark will.
Yeah. Don't encourage him.
At the time, I remember reading an article because they really marketed that bike about how incredibly fuel efficient it was, given that it was 700 cc's and it was 40-something brake horsepower. But I remember reading something somewhere where somebody said, well, actually, the most economical engine is a single long-stroke, four-stroke engine, and Enfield have been making it for donkey's years, and it does incredible miles to the gallon. But Enfield have never really traded on that too much, I don't think, have they, about how economical they are?
In India, that's been a big deal. I mean, so in India, fuel economy has definitely been part of it, and fuel economy for a given capacity. What you've been able to do in India with our 350s is buy an engine that can compete kind of down, if you like, with the 150s and the 100 cc's, offer the same kind of fuel economy, but with a 350 engine, which is double or treble the size, and is a proper big bike. That's actually been a big sort of... And in India, people are almost obsessed with fuel economy.
Are they?
Yeah. You
I'd love it there.
There was a guy called Ravi that used to work for me, really, really lovely guy. And I remember him once saying to me, you got to understand it, Mark. You can have a guy that's just bought a BMW M5, £200,000 car in India because he's had to import it and pay 100% import tax. And India has more millionaires than anywhere else in the world, so it's not about not having the money. But the first question they'll ask is, what mileage do you get? And it's
your worst nightmare, Clive, isn't it?
My point is, with fuel economy on a motorbike, if you want to save fuel, don't go out on a fucking motorbike on a leisure ride. The best way of saving that fuel is just to not buy the fucking motorbike and leave the fuel in the fuel station.
I had exactly that conversation with my wife on a regular basis. For a while, I had the least economic fleet of vehicles in the world. I had the VTR, which has got the biggest carburetors of any motorcycle ever made. Genuinely, that's a fact. And would get about 85 miles on a tank of fuel. I had a 2.5 WRX turbo Impreza and a old 2003 Porsche Cayenne V8 turbo.
See, no, that's winning at life, not this fucking fuel economy.
Got it at a really good price for what it was. It was, it blows my mind, the depreciation on them. Anyway, Jenny's mate had just bought I think it was like a Fiat 500 Twin Air or something. And so all of a sudden, she'd never mentioned fuel economy before. She said to me, what mileage do we get on this new car that we're buying? And I went, 20 miles to the gallon, maybe.
Seemed to be at the garage an awful lot filling up.
We got it home, and it had an average MPG on it, and it was 15. And I said, the guy who had it before us just had a lead foot. It won't be that. so then I had to go. I think we had a problem with the toilet or something. I got a screw fixed. We live in the middle of nowhere, so it's like a journey wherever you go anywhere. And I cane it everywhere. And I'd gone to Market Harbour to get a part, and I got back. I came in, I put the kettle on. She went out to the car to do something or other, came back in. I read the manual, and I reset the trip meter before you went out. And And when you went to Market Harbour, you got 7 miles to the gallon.
Is there a bike that you wish you'd designed?
Oh, do you know what? That's a really good question. All the time. Every time something comes out, I get a kind of a aching, oh, bugger, I wish we'd done that. Again, it's those sort of classics that I was just talking about. Things like the R7, I think, is just a beautiful bike. The NR750, the Honda NR750, something that was really groundbreaking like that.
Is that the one with the oval pistons?
Yeah, that clearly, from an engineering point of view, was pushing boundaries, but also from a styling point of view. You know, that if you think about it, the 916 was really heavily influenced by that. If you look at that kind of wasted shape, that figure of 8, bikes like the first Katana, that, you know, was almost the first time that the industrial design proper was used on a motorcycle. You know, up until that point, styling was done by an engineer that had an eye for it. Yeah, that was the first time that somebody sat down and said we should design a thing. And sometimes that's been bad for bikes, but I think on that bike it was really strong. But yeah, there's lots of things. Every time somebody else, you know, you walk around the bike show, and the Panigale is a, you know, just a brilliant bit of design. It's got more and more bastardized as it's gone on, but the sort of the purity of the first V2 that had the full structural engine and the bolted off the front, the back, the headstock bolted off the front, and the subframe bolted off the back. I think that was beautiful.
Do you remember David Essex's Silver Dream Racer?
I don't know that I can claim to remember it, but I've seen the film.
I just remember watching it as a kid thinking, that bike's amazing. Google it now. It's fucking awful.
Yeah, it's awful. I was going to say, don't Google it. It's better in the memory than it is in reality.
Was my era. Do you remember Street Hawk, where it used to jump out the front at the beginning? And
I was probably at university then, not watching that sort of thing.
I'm just really grateful I've been able to be involved in what I've been able to be involved in, really.
You tell the story of your evolution as a designer from a kid drawing pictures, and Julian tells a very similar story, really, about drawing cars, going through to university to setting up your own company, and that's a fairly magical story as well. So again, listen to that other podcast. It's really good stuff.
Looking back on it and telling it as a story, it was magical. At the time, it was, you know, pretty miserable. I mean, we got sued by our postman at one point. He walked into our door and split his eye open, and then sued us, and you know there was all sorts of bits along the way that were, yeah, it was horrible.
Postman.
Again, it's funny now, but at the time it was miserable. Yeah. We weren't making any money at all. We'd just moved into our new premises. This was about the time of the credit crunch, and I was working in Spain for Rieju, you know, the little Spanish manufacturer that do little gearbox 125s and 50s. We were working on those Rieju RS3, which was their little sports bike. And we had a mate called Geordie Mark. That was at uni. We were clearly not that creative because I'm Cockney Mark. Geordie Mark. He'd just set up a business doing large format printing. He bought himself like a 3-meter solvent printer. He was renting some space off us because he needed a big long space to put it in, but just a desk to work from. So we'd said, yeah, right. And then we'll use it we did full scale plots of bikes. And he rang me up and said, oh, the postman's just walked in at the door. And I was like, well, what do you want me to do about it? I'm in Spain. I was, you know, give him a plaster and send him on his way. And then about 6 months later, we got a letter from the Union of Postal Workers and Baggage Carriers, or whatever they were, solicitors, saying that he was suing us for 1,500 quid for time off work, and I think it was 200 quid for his glasses and 5 quid for a paracetamol.
Oh,
genuinely itemised as that, 5 quid. It was a glass door, and it had a roller shutter behind it on a motor, and the motor had jammed and it had stuck about a quarter of the way down, and he'd obviously been sorting through his mail as he opened the door. And so we said, you know, we had a solicitor come and look at it, and he said, oh yeah, you'll win that, no bother at all. And then it went on and on and on, and there were letters exchanged, and we said, well, I'm not going to be part of this compensation culture. And then about 8 months down the line, my cousin worked in insurance, and I said to him, you know, where do you think this is going to go? And he said, well, they won't have expected you to fight it. Because the other thing is we were a partnership, so we were joint and severally liable. So our houses and our cars and what we own were on the line. He said normally, and the other point was that we'd taken out public liability insurance, but it only started on the Monday and this happened on the Wednesday. So we weren't covered. And so he said, you know, normally any insurance company would just pay out. He said anything under 2, they've set it at the limit, and they've done it just under the limit because they know that everybody will pay out. And so you're an anomaly that they weren't expecting. And he said, you know, basically it'll end up, and we'd said, well, the landlord fixed it, so shouldn't they be liable because it was part of the snagging list? And they said, well, you have to take all 3 parties to court, and you'll probably win. You've got a 70% chance of winning, but if you lose, you'll have to pay all 3 parties legal fees. And so in the end, we ended up settling out of court, and we had to pay about $8,000, I think it was. And we didn't have a bean at the time. I mean, we hadn't taken any money out of business. We had to pay for it on credit cards. I had to borrow some money off mum and dad to pay for it. And I had a night job. I worked in a petrol station because we couldn't make ends meet. And so it was a long, hard slog because we, you know, I mean, when you look at it, we were idiots. We were naive. We graduated from university with an automotive design degree, but you know so much about a job before you do it. In a country where there was nobody making motorbikes other than Triumph, and Triumph, we did quite a bit of work for Triumph, but initially they weren't interested at all. And to this day, they don't have an in-house design team. John Bloor doesn't believe they now use a single consultant quite a lot. We did quite a bit of work for them over the years. They were an interesting company to work for. But we did work for Yamaha, for Aprilia, for Triumph, for Yahoo. And we did lots of other stuff for little businesses like, Performance Parts Limited. We did their catalogues and their brochures for years, graphic design for that sort of thing. And so we cut our teeth. I mean, I remember one of the first bits of design work we did was with a business called Pyramid Plastics that made like huggers and GLP parts. And I mean, they were great. They really helped us early on. I remember the first thing we made for them, we made a pattern. And we knew about angles of draw. So when you make a mould, you have to be able to get it out of the mould. And we knew that we could use the flex of the part to get a little return edge, so you could have a joggle, so you could then trim it back to it, so you didn't have a cut edge. So we'd worked all that out, but what we didn't account for was the pattern was stiff. So the part would have flex in it, but the pattern was stiff, and we made the tool around the pattern and then couldn't get the bloody thing out. And I remember just sitting there scratching our heads thinking, and we learned through lots of trial and error, and so it took us a long time to get any momentum in the business at all, any inertia. And it's a funny industry because you're a really specialist thing if you're doing motorcycle design. There's not many clients required for it. Once you've got your foot under the table, once you're known, then actually it's really easy to reach those clients because there's only so many people that can do it as well. But getting established, getting to that point, that took a long time and a lot of graft and a lot of effort. And I mean, we came very close to quitting a couple of times. I mean, in the end, we worked for Royal Enfield from 2005, and then we did the Classic 350 with them.
I am going to get one of those. I love that bike.
They're a lovely bike. They've got so much character. So we did that, and then we did the GT 535, and then 2014, I think it was, Sid Arthur just moved to London, and he invited me down, and I met him at St Pancras train station, went and had brunch with him at St Pancras train station. And he said, how do we work more closely together? So we went away and we put together a business case where we said, look, we could do a retainer type business. We could hire some engineers. We could do a bit. And he said, actually, what I really want is you to work for the company. And at the time, we'd spent 15 years establishing this business, and it was doing all right. We'd got to a point where we were doing well. We were turning money over. We had 12 guys working for us. And we kind of ummed and ahed about it. And I think they really thought we were negotiating, but we weren't. We genuinely didn't know what to do. We weren't sure. We had a project there was a project that we were working on. We were working on a buggy for someone, a side-by-side, which was a huge project. We had to let a couple of contractors go. And I remember sitting with Ian, my business partner, and saying to him, it's always going to be like this. It's like a light switch. Like, one project is perfect. 2 is great. 3 is too many because you overtrade and you can't then, you need too many. You can't manage to meet the work. And because you've only got, you're reliant on one big chunky project. If somebody turns that off, it's not like if they take the project away, that's it. You've got no work, and you've then got to go and find a new job. And it's always going to be like this. And so, we after lots of umming and ahhing, we joined Royal Enfield. We brought a few of the guys with us. So Ian and I joined in 2015, and some of the chaps didn't come with us and have since joined Royal Enfield. And so now there's only one person that used to work for us that doesn't now work for Royal Enfield, which is lovely because it's a real family feel across the team. And it was the best decision we ever made. The difference of working for the business versus being a consultant, for us at least, with a boss like Sid Arthur and with PGR, our CEO, is you get proper influence. As a consultant, you can say, I don't think this is the right thing to do. And you can say that once, maybe twice. And then at that point, they'll go, we'll just find another consultant that will do what we want to do. Whereas now I'm in a position where I really get to influence what bikes we make, and I can hand on heart say, we made that because we thought it was a good idea. And that's, I'm accountable for it. If it's the wrong decision, I'll know about it. I get to have that influence, and that's awesome. It's, it blows my mind. And it was a bit like winning the lottery, to be honest. It's been good.
The customary question at the end, when you were talking about the providence of Royal Enfield and the history of it, it just got me thinking about something I once read. I think it was in an official Land Rover book that I had, and it said Land Rover had worked out the percentage of Land Rovers that they'd ever made that was still on the road, and it was massive. It was 90-something% of all Land Rovers ever made are still on the road. And I wondered, that probably is a similar sort of case with Enfield, isn't it?
I always use Land Rover as an analogy for Royal Enfield. Yeah. When people talk about Royal Enfields, I always go back to Land Rover because I think there's some really strong similarities.
Parallels, yeah.
I don't know the answer to the question. I mean, certainly there are a lot of bullets still on the road, and there's lots that are heirlooms. We did an anniversary book a few years ago, and we interviewed sort of 3 generations of family. We were doing some research up in the north of India, And I've been asking to go and see some rural dealerships. We always get taken to, when you say I want to go and visit a dealership and talk to some customers, and we get taken to the best ones. And I was like, can we see some rural ones? So we got on bikes and we rode around northern India and we went to a few dealerships. And they said, do you want to meet some proper rural customers? I said, yes, please. Right, jump on your bikes, follow us. So we rode up to this place. This was just after the Interceptor had come out. And it was a dairy farm. So it was two brothers owned a dairy farm with like 1,000 cattle, I think it was. And they were a bit gangster. What? So the first thing the guy said to me, can you get me a gun? He didn't speak English. This was through a translator. He said, can you get me a gun? And I was like, no, they're illegal in England. And he said, but your Royal Enfield made like a gun. Surely you can get a gun. And I was like, oh, right. No, we can't. And this family they were, as I say, they were like 3 generations. They had 19 Bullets and Classics between them. We'd turned up and this guy had seen the Interceptor and he walked over and he said, what's this? And I could see him looking at it and he could see it had 2 exhausts. And he said, why has it got 2? And I said, because it's got 2 cylinders. And he was like, wow. And then he said, can I have a go? And I thought he meant on the throttle to hear the sound. So he revved it a couple of times and then just jumped off it and shot off down the road. It disappeared. And he was gone for it felt like
a long time.
Minutes. It's probably only, but I was thinking, I'm not going to go home. He came back and he said, this is amazing. This is like a super bullet. I should own one of these. I'm the most important man in this village. I should own one of these. And I said to him, how much do you think? He said to me, how much is it? And I said, well, how much do you think it should be? And at the time, they were like 2.7 lakh, which is about 2.5 grand. And so he said to me, 4 lakh. And I went, no, 3 lakh, 2 lakh. And I said 2.75. Yeah. And then he just turned to the guy he was with and he said to him, I think he said something in I think he said panchode, which means sister fucker. Quite a heavy insult. It's the dealer. And he was like, I should own one of these. Why do you not think I can afford this? I can afford this. But that whole kind of fierceness for the brand and the sort of the generations of owners is so strong with the brand. It is absolutely what the core of the brand is. And so, yeah, I'm sure there definitely are lots of the original cast iron engine bikes still around.
Well, Clive said before you came on, Mark, he said, I think this will be good, and it wasn't wrong. That's great stuff.
What I'm really worried about is that I'm going to go away, I'm going to think of loads of fucking things that we should have asked.
I just think of so many people saying, why didn't you ask him that? Why didn't you ask?
I've got a question for you guys. And you kind of already answered it a little bit, Clive, in that you told me you want a 130 kilo trail bike. But what should we do next? If you were, and I always ask this question of interviewees when I'm looking to employ someone, but if you had the 5-minute elevator pitch idea to Siddharth to say, you know what, this is what the market needs, this is what's missing today, what would be the thing you'd do next?
I don't know what the thing I would do next because I'm not sure how popular it would be. I think certainly in the community that we talk to, I think it'd be really fucking popular is a 400 engine, everything that an EXC is, KTM EXC, but without the 20-hour or the 10-hour oil changes, without the expense. You've got to take a detuned engine that can run forever, put it in a lighter weight chassis with reasonable suspension on it, reasonable ground clearance. So effectively, it's a CRF with 40 brake horsepower.
Do you want to be able to take luggage on it?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And a pillion?
Not so much a pillion, no. We want to be able to take it on a TET trip with tent and stuff on the back.
15 kilos?
Probably. Yeah, so you need a decent subframe on it.
And then you start adding in, do you want a centre stand?
No.
Don't need a centre stand. Tubeless tyres?
I'm not fussed about tubeless tyres. I know a lot of people get fussy about them, but I'm used to having tubes in and taking them to
He's not writing any of this down, Clive. I've noticed that.
He knows it already. You've heard this. You must have heard it many times.
I think there is. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely on the money. I think there is a market for a lightweight, usable adventure bike. And certainly with the Himalayan, that was our goal. And if I'm honest, it's maybe not quite as light as we would have liked. But that's because of some of those other things, because we did want a centre stand. We do want, we wanted the luggage capability. We wanted those front frame rails to be able to carry luggage. We wanted the rear frame rails to carry luggage. It is up. You can carry, we've gone for upside down forks, so that adds a bit of weight. So actually the engine we've saved like 10 kilos off the engine, but put it back in other places in order to up the spec of everything.
Colin Chapman said it's added lightness.
Yeah, and that costs sometimes. You have to pay for materials, you have to pay for steels, and
presumably it's thinner tubes and things like that to get the lightness.
Well, you have to pay for that. You have to pay for the grade of steel that you're using, so that adds a cost element to it. That one of the issues with using enduro or motocross bikes for adventure riding is you can't put the luggage on them. They haven't got the subframe. You have to then uprate the subframe, and then, and as you say, the engine durability just isn't there. We put our engines through probably too much, but we do huge amounts of on the dynos. We do hundreds and hundreds of hours on dynos at wide open throttle, and going through test cycles. And again, it's that usage thing. It's what you're using it for. So yes, you can make everything lighter, but then you do end up with service intervals that are much, much closer.
We've gone from a 250 to a 300 CRF. And the argument has always been, well, you can't make it a 400 because of emissions. And it's like, well, that doesn't sound right.
There is some truth in that. The difficulty with emissions is about engine and temperature control. As much as anything else, you have to be out of control. So that's why an air-cooled engine is quite hard to get through emissions, and a water-cooled engine is. So, we went from a 24 brake horsepower air-cooled engine to a 40 brake horsepower water-cooled engine with the same capacity. Fundamentally, because we've gone at water cool, because you can control. I mean, it's not just that we've gone for a different valve arrangement, but controlling temperature is a big part of emissions, and having an accurate control on temperature and being at a control temperature at startup and then at running temperature. And that's what EFI does, is allows you to control that more. And the introduction of cats and pre-cats and all of that is constantly. And engines are pretty efficient now, but definitely there is a point where it gets harder and harder to control, because you're having to rev it higher in order to get the same performance, and it is always a trade-off. You absolutely could achieve it, but there'd be a price point, and there'd be...
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You don't want it to cost 10.5 grand like an EXC does now. You want it... And I was kind of thinking, well, a CRF's what, 6 grand or so now? And then by the time you've put the rally raid suspension on it, there's another grand. I've put a CBR 300 clutch in mine because the clutches go quite quickly on them.
I quite like the CRF. I found the suspension definitely needs changing on it, because it was like a pogo stick when I first got on it. Out of the box, it's not right. And again, they've made trade-offs. They've looked at stuff and said, where do we want to price it? Who wants to buy it? Who are we aiming it at? It's interesting that and I think going back to, have you ever seen a Sur-Ron, their latest, their Ultra B?
Yeah, I'm trying to get Noel to take balaclavas to the bike show so we could go and sit on the Sur-Rons.
There's the Light B, which is the one that's almost a pedelec. It's almost a mountain bike, but it's bigger than a mountain bike. The latest one is the Ultra B, which is like a 100 or an 80cc sort of scale bike. That's really interesting. As a little trail bike, if you're not going anywhere, you can drop that and pick it up. They're 90 kilos.
To your point, there was loads of people at this beauty spot in this park somewhere with lots of little walks around it, and this guy was on a Sur-Ron, just whizzing around. He wasn't being a dick. He was being quite respectful and careful and sensible.
Wasn't delivering narcotics.
Don't think so. Nobody even gave him a second glance. There was no furious looks. I said to Rachel, look, legally, that is a motorbike. He should not be here doing that. But look, nobody gives a monkeys, do they?
I definitely think that's got to be one of the things for racing, for example. So I remember going up to Croft, and they have a noise meter in the control tower that then reports back to the council, and they can only run so many days. And EV bikes will mean that any bit of land could be a motocross track again.
Electric trials bike just dicking around in your own garden. It's not going to bother anybody, is it, really?
I would like the wholly impractical Dakar copy bike and the V-twin, please, in some kind of old... Yeah, please, yeah.
For your Dakar bike, are you...
He doesn't want to do the Dakar. He just wants to pose around coffee shops.
It's for Instagram. It's for Instagram.
Okay. So just Dakar lookalike.
I did get a lot of excited messages when that image popped up on the internet.
Which one?
The Dakar, of the Dakar bike, yeah. One of them was from somebody who's come up with this great big sort of thing that traverses across Europe in sort of a trans sort of a way. He was very excited about that bike.
Have you looked at the picture of that KX, the Royal Enfield
it's great,
KX?
isn't
It's beautiful.
I tell you what I really like the idea of is a amateur Dakar.
Yeah.
So again, like we do in India, we do the GT Cup, and that's the same idea where we basically make race series.
Come on, let's do it. That's a great idea.
You guys ever go to Molly Mile?
No, really want to.
I mean, it's terribly hipster, but
I don't care.
Brilliant fun. Loads of people that have just built random stuff in their shed and then ride it. And there's loads of sort of, inappropriate stuff. So there's loads of people doing hill climbs on GSXRs with knobbly tyres on and some proper vintage classic stuff, some kind of cool 80s stuff. And it's just it's a lovely vibe to that. It's a really, really good event.
It's a bit of a mystery to me where it is and when it is.
So it used to be down in Kent, but they've changed it now, and it's now not far from us. It's like Lincolnshire.
Your event down in Goa looked fucking amazing as well. So this is a Royal Enfield event.
So Ridermania, we do it every year, and every year it gets bigger. So I think this year I think I'm right in saying there was about 15,000 people turned up. So they ride from all over India. So last year I rode there. We went from Chennai, which is on the east coast, the old Madras, to Goa, and we did 1,000 miles, and we did it in about 4 days, I think. But a good chunk of that was off road. We just used, there's an app I use called Kalimoto, which I love, and we just randomly rode across India, and it was incredible. We saw wild elephants, and we ended up in tiger parks, and just awesome. But you get there, and everybody's elated, and there's this sort of spring break feel to it. There's like loads of events happening. So there's like a hill climb, there's a trials race, there's a scramble, there's flat tracking now, there's adventure bike training, there was a bike maze, there's cleanest bike competition. They do a thing where you have to sort of, like the gun carriage competitions you get at tattoos, where you take so you take the engine out of the bike, you have to run up the other end with the engine and then put it back in the bike at the other end. Arm wrestling, drinking. And then every evening, there's a big music concert. So there's about 3 music stages. So it's like a small British music festival with really high-end Indian artists, and international, but Indian artists, rappers, DJs, all sorts of stuff. But the energy is incredible because the average age of a Royal Enfield customer in India is about 25. So it's kind of like Sturgis might have been, I guess, back in the 80s, I don't know, but there's so much energy there, and everybody is so excited to be there. And Goa is an awesome place anyway. This year, Sid rode the new shotgun onto the stage, and Albie and I were stood right on the backstage behind the drum kit. We were hiding behind one of the drum kits, and for Albie to be there and see the whole crowd of 15,000 people with the fireworks, and he was just eyes like this. It was just, it's just an amazing event. And as I say, I think that's what I love most about Royal Enfield, is just the enthusiasm of our customers in India. You get out of the cities, and India is stunningly beautiful. Been very fortunate, and I've been able to ride all over. The perception of India is all the roads are broken, which is true in a lot of places, and there's obviously lots of off-road trails and tracks and things to ride. But there's also some of the best roads anywhere in the world. There's a place called Collie Hills. Google Collie Hills, Kolhi, Collie. 79 hairpin bends, one after the other. And because it's not used, they don't get any frost in the road, so the tarmac never cracks. And as long as it hasn't got trucks going up and down it, it doesn't get used. You've got to avoid the monkeys and the buses. And the other thing with India is it's liberating. Because of the way everybody drives, there's no road rage. Nobody gets upset if you cut them up or if So it's liberating. You just ride like a hooligan and nobody cares. It's awesome. I love it. It's such a cool place to ride motorbikes. It really is.
I don't know how to frame the question really, but do you talk much about the aging demographic in the UK of the average motorcyclist and what the future holds?
I mean, that's an interesting thing for us, is that to get the economies of scale, and because we don't think that there should be a 2-tier approach, we make the same bikes globally. So we don't make a different spec bike for North America or Europe or India. The quality is the same, the production standards are the same, the approach is the same. It takes a long time to shake off the reputation, and our quality didn't used to be great, and it is now genuinely much, much, much better. It is now globally as good as anybody else. And I'm biased, I'm bound to say that, but the data shows it. So the bikes we build are the same, but the customers are totally different. The demographic is entirely different. So the guy that buys a classic 350 in India is completely different to the guy that buys it in Europe. In Europe, you are talking at least 50 plus, and a lot of the time 60 plus, or maybe even 70 plus for our bikes. In India, the same bike is being bought by a 25-year-old, maybe a 30-year-old.
But in the UK, you don't think it's a shrinking market?
It is, and it's a real conundrum as to how do you get people onto bikes. It goes back to the licensing laws thing. It goes back to I think, again, for us, part of that, and the way that we're trying to address that in our little ways, by making bikes accessible, not making bikes that feel like they're toys, but making, so like the Hunter. The Hunter's a great example of that. We were told there was no market for a 350 in Europe. Everybody told me, no, Mark, you won't sell any of these in Europe. I don't know, because I think if you live in London today and the speed limit is 20 mile an hour, bikes get stolen all the time. You don't want bikes that's going to cost you 20 grand and do 160 mile an hour. You don't need that. What you want is a bike that's cool and that is agile and that will dodge around the doors, and that you can, if you're only doing a 20 mile radius, you want to be able to go to the pub and go to see your girlfriend and go. So for us, I think that's where we're trying to, we see an opportunity there for getting girls on bikes, getting youngsters on bikes. I think there is an opportunity there, but it is absolutely an uphill struggle. And I think as an industry in the West, we have some fundamental problems to address. There is no doubt that people are more risk averse. And that's sad because, they miss out on the joy of it, and to the point where, so my whole livelihood, my whole life revolves around motorcycles. My wife doesn't let the boys go on the back of a bike with me.
No. Well, so you, Clay, you've got 3 or possibly 4 boys. I'm not sure. None of them seem to be riding motorcycles.
I've not encouraged them to go onto motorbikes. We've done karting and stuff like that, and we still do every now and again. But especially boys, I want them to be 25 before they go anywhere near a bike. It's a well-known fact that there's part of their brain is not properly developed. The piece of your brain that tells you to be cautious about stuff isn't only fully developed once you hit 25, because they're fucking idiots. A massive thank you to Mark for doing that. That was a really enjoyable evening we spent chatting to him, and hopefully you've really enjoyed listening to that too. Right, I'm not sure who we've got in the next exciting instalment. We've got about 8 people lined up. I just need to get some names in the diaries. But yeah, we've got a cracking season, some amazing guests lined up to come and talk to us. All right, see you next time. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you really appreciate what we do, you could consider supporting us on Patreon or buy us a coffee. Links are available on our website, which is tampodcast.com, tampodcast.com, where we also have a limited selection of branded stuff. But either way, please keep listening and spreading the word. See you next time.